Once again, thanks for viewing. I'm Scott Dixon for You Can't Handle the Truth. If you have not had a chance to watch episodes 1 and 2, which obviously preceded 3, please do so, because these concepts may not make a lot of sense if you don't. So this is our third installment. We're going to talk a little bit about FIVR. We're going to do that in terms of 2 broader concepts. So if you've been in the strength training community or a physical preparation community for long enough, you'll know that there is roughly a tension between practice and science. And for some people, they will consistently go on the side of science. Other people will consistently go on the side of practice. My suggestion to you, much like the previous with FIVR, is that we always need a balance of things. So there are people like Coach Ian King who rely heavily on practice, and rightly so. The results dictate that what he's doing works with his athletes, in particular athletes that he works with, not necessarily bodybuilders and the like. But where science can inform that practice, he takes that serious. Other people say, like I would take it Lane Norton, much more rely on the science side, and if practice conflicts with that, they probably take the science side. Especially, I think Lane does this in terms of nutrition, being fair. So we have people who do and emphasize each one of these. Now, just a few words on both. Science is always going to probably be the best explaining game in town in terms of the physical body. Practice may not tell us what's actually going on in our body. It might be what we call a folk notion. So if we are sick, we typically go to the doctor because the doctor, we think, has a greater understanding of the physiology of our body and of the overall way that the disease progresses. They in turn typically will give us chemicals that then hopefully get our bodies back on track. And that's why we go to the doctor. However, if any of you have had any experiences with doctors over the years, sometimes they don't have all the answers, and sometimes what they do doesn't work. I'd like to think that science will continue to progress, at least in some sense, and be able to tell us more and more about our bodies. But I don't really think we'll ever get to the stage, at least in my lifetime, where we have a complete understanding of how things go. So that then makes us rely on things like practice, what actually works in someone's experience. So I've got 34 years of training experience myself, and I don't think that I wouldn't be the person I am today, but I also wouldn't have an understanding of what I'm talking about in general in terms of physical preparation of any kind without that experience behind me. And that's why there's a lot of backlash against people in the Instagram community who, have trained for a year and a half and they've got 40,000 followers and they're acting as if they're an authority when in reality they're not. They were born with a low body fat, they put some muscle on, and now they're an expert. Well, that doesn't make an expert. So in fact, they are lacking both practice and science in many cases. So what I'm proposing, and what I think most of us should try to do, is to have a balance of these 2 things. And that balance is, I'm going to put it into a kind of much might be controversial. I think that term of art factors in when we can do that. That when we know that science is informative in certain contexts and can help us achieve our goal, but also practice can as well. But that takes typically years of experience, or it takes a particular kind of training and educational and just kind of an overall maturity. That's why you should probably trust people who are older in the training game. And not just because I'm old, but just simply because they've seen these kinds of things over the years. Science has told us and led to many trends. The whole stability trend that you still see people standing on Bosa balls, a bunch of S's there, and they thought that this was good for them. Well, that fad wore off. dynamic stretching was a fad. Now that's kind of worn off. Still people do it. Static stretching at one point was a fad, but especially in kind of general physical preparation, you know, kids stretch. But that one's kind of stood the test of time, so it's probably not a fad in the same sense. So, but those typically, science will come in and say, oh, static stretching is bad. And then another study will come along and say, well, it's really not bad if you keep your stretches under 40 seconds. So there's always qualifications of that. And if you spend a lot of time reading the scientific literature, ultimately you kind of get your head spinning rather quickly. You can also get your head spinning pretty quickly with practice. You talk to one person in the gym, they tell you that, hey, this is how I did it. You talk to another person, this is how they did it. And really what you should probably do is pick somebody you trust and go with what they say and try it out. And I think that's, you know, if you're hiring a trainer, that's what you should do. You should give 100% commitment to what that person says for a particular period of time. And if it doesn't work, then that person's probably not the right person for you. However, as I said in the last or first lecture presentation, that virtually anything works for a short period of time just because it's typically a different stimulus. So what I want you to think about is kind of developing an art of this over time. I know that there are people I've known for years, and I'll give a shout out to Jamie in particular on this, that I can't tell him much about his body. He might ask me for some advice, but he's been training long enough. He knows what to do to make his body grow. And if something isn't growing, he comes to me maybe and asks me for some suggestions. And I've got, you know, a couple dozen people who do that on a regular basis. So, but that's only suggestions given my experience in kind of this art form that we're going to call, if you will, maybe power training. I think that might be the kind of moniker that we want to take for the overall thing of what we're trying to do. We're trying to all get a little bit stronger. We're trying to all get a little bit bigger. This isn't directly relating to powerlifting as a sport or bodybuilding as a sport, but that's the general idea of what we're trying to do. Obviously, if you're doing either one of those two activities or weightlifting, you're going to be doing specific things. As you can see, I'm not really aiming at that. I'm kind of aiming at what we want to do in our lives and kind of overall have a good life, of which our training is a part of, and that we can get the most out of in the time that we have to do it. So I would recommend, however, that if you are interested in any kind of the science stuff, Chris Beardsley has a monthly newsletter that it costs, I think, $10 a month, but it's well worth it to see what kind of the latest research is. And just this morning, I went and looked at the latest issue, and it was very clear that, you know, Chris understands the literature and was able to give practical applications of it. Now, I would disagree with some of those practical applications because I think that he's making maybe too strong of an inference based on what the study did. So for example, if the study is just based on, you know, some quadricep work and someone saying that will affect your overall body in this way, it's probably not a strong inference. But nevertheless, I learn a lot and it keeps me thinking about this stuff. If you're interested in it, get Beardsley. There's a couple other newsletters that if you really want to kind of know what they are, I'm happy to kind of tell you about them. But I'd start with Beardsley. It's like, I think of the Strength and Conditioning Supplement or Journal, or not the Strength and Conditioning Journal, something like that. You can find it online. So that's something about this. Now, with FIVR, I have our four concepts here: frequency, intensity, volume, and recovery. And I've ranked those. And I want you to, here's my challenge to you. I want you to think about if that ranking is correct. Because it seems to me, and this is what I've patterned my kind of training philosophy on, is that this always has to be number one. If you're not going to be able to recover, as we saw in the last presentation, then you're going to undermine any potential progress from these things. I also told you frequency from the first lecture is my most important concept of these three. Why? Because the more often you can train and the more you can recover, the more your potential for growth, whether that's hypertrophy or strength. You notice that I've listed these two at the same level. Now, some of you, for example, if you're more to a strength kind of a strength emphasis would probably put intensity over volume. Maybe a bodybuilder might put more volume over intensity. But think about how you could organize these. I think you should give recovery number one, but you might think about these differently, because that's going to once again give you a meta set of principles that's going to allow you to think about your training in a broader sense. That's actually approaching it both scientifically and through practice though. Why? Because your past experience is going to inform this, but also anything that you think in terms of things that I've talked about in the last episode might factor into your recovery. So both of those are actually incorporated into how you might rank these. So I'm going to end on that, and in our next episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking about if we're going to grant our frequency, that's typically going to have a certain amount of these two things. And I'm going to give you an idea of how to determine those in the next episode.